Okay, so we're going to be starting now some of the new features that are in CSS version 3. So this is the latest standard. Different software go through different updates, upgrades, and when they have upgrades, new codes come in, things that might have been hard and old the old code now become easier. And so I'm going to show you some of the things that you can do in CSS3 that you either couldn't do in the earlier versions of CSS or were challenging. But because it's the newest version, you want to be aware that there are sometimes you might be in a browser that doesn't support the new code. And so I have in front of you a list of the different codes and which browsers, which versions of the browsers support them. In most cases, you're going to be fine because most of the newer browsers support CSS and you're probably using a newer browser. But in the case that you're not, just take a look at this list. And sometimes there are, if you're using an old browser, let's say for instance, you can see that border radius, which is the first thing that we're going to do, which is learning how to do rounded corners on tables or text boxes. You can see that that's supported by Firefox version 4.0. But if you're using Firefox version 3.0, you have to do a kind of a workaround and let the browser know that you're how to deal with this code. So I'll try to, when we go into a code that's not as broadly supported, I'll try to uh, put some information in there. But just be aware that if you don't see, if your code is right and you don't see what you expect to see, then it might be a browser support issue. Okay, but there are lots of cool things that we're going to be learning in CSS3, and it's really a great way to cap off our CSS lesson. The first thing that we're going to learn is how to do rounded corners. And you can see here, see if I can show this right here. So you can see I use a rounded corner right here on my table. So it's a really nice feature to be able to take your a corner, a table, a div box, whatever, and make it rounded. So let's go in here and do that. So I'm going to go into my edit, and this is what you should see as your startup code. And it's really just one line that we have to add to our code in order to make the div box or the table or whatever rounded. So you can see what we're starting off with is I created a div box with the ID rounded and put some text in there. Now that the fact that I call the ID rounded doesn't mean anything, right? Because what I see is a box. I do have a border on it, a 2 pixel border. I have some padding. I have a background, a gray background, and I made it 300 pixels wide. Okay, so not, right now it's just straightforward. I just have it as a div ID rounded. But what I do, if in order to make it rounded, I go border. I type in border radius, and then I type in whatever pixels I want. And what that does is rather than going a straight line here, it creates a 25 pixel radius from this point to this point. Okay, we don't need to get too much into the geography, but what you can see, geometry, excuse me. But what you can see is that if I do a larger number, it gives more of a rounded. If I do a smaller number, it gives a less of a rounded. You can see it's just barely rounded up there. And so you can experiment with what you want, but you can see that by adding this code or this declaration, border dash radius, in CSS3, you can do something that's pretty cool super easily. Okay, so that's your first assignment, is create a rounded corner box. The next thing that we're going to do is create a shadow box, and this is pretty neat too. So let's go here. So we have a div ID equals shadow, div shadow. Just put in some standard margin things to separate it from the other box. Um, you can see here is a little bit of padding from the side. Okay, so nothing nothing crazy. But what we want to do is we want to create a shadow underneath it. And the way that we do that is we type in box dash shadow. Again, see how easy it is if they have the right codes. And we're going to create a 10 pixel to the right, 10 pixel down, 5 pixel how deep the shadow is, and I'll show you what I mean by that. And then we can decide on the color of the shadow, and I have one here because this is what they gave me. So what you're doing here is you're saying I want this to be the shadow to be 10 pixels to the right, 10 pixels down. Then how deep behind the box do you want it to be? And then what color do you want the shadow to be? And I'm just going to click submit, and you can see what this looks like. And this is a place where you just experiment. So you can see here that I created a shadow right here that is this far down, or this far to the right, this far down, and then you can see when I say deep, it means how far behind the box is it in terms of how strong is the shadow. And what I mean by that is if I change this to 15 pixels, you can see that the shadow becomes a little bit more diffuse, a little bit less strong. And then this is how far to the right. So if I do 50, let's see, I'm going to make it a little farther over there. You can just experiment with this though and see what you like. Because the real key here is that I want you to be able to take border radius equals something pixels, box shadow, and then these parameters, and to add some style to your page. Okay, so save work, and those are your two assignments.